Talk is from Hossam Farid from Oracle. He's going to talk about upstream data management to create collaborative work environments. Hossam has worked in the industry for 25 years, both upstream and downstream, and has been with Oracle for 15 years. He's currently head of the global business unit and guiding transformational integration type projects. He's a BSc from mechanical engineering and a graduate from the Wharton and an MBA from the Wharton Business School. Hossam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for giving me the chance, and Oracle as well, to share with you our thoughts on what we've been doing in around one of the most critical initiatives of the last 2 decades in the upstream oil business. First, I'd like to start with a disclaimer as a public company, the essence of which is all the information described here, the timing, the features, and so on, comes at the sole discretion of Oracle. Oracle is a major supplier to the market of software, applications, database, middleware, and hardware as well. We are a $145 billion in market capital company, 100,000 employees, and about 17% of our revenue goes to the R&D process. We've been helping a number of oil companies over the last 30 years or so to mainly create or assist the transformations in these organizations to foster the innovation and growth. As I guess the subject of today, over the last 2 decades almost, number of development tools, new approaches to architectures, and others represented numerous pilots around what is called the digital oil field. Maybe we just take a stop here and remind ourselves what were the objectives of these projects and these pilots. The objectives were very clear, is to leverage the real-time data coming from various systems here in order to create an environment that would allow them to use sophisticated analytics and risk management tools and the likes to continuously optimize the oil field performance. And here is the beginning of the process that we are looking at. The challenges to achieving that and the disillusionment that Julian was referring to comes primarily from one specific challenge, is the fact that the existing or the current applications, software and application solutions, the data sources and the data stores, the infrastructures existing today, they are very well aligned to do exactly as the functional requirement that they were created for, but they don't integrate in a broader context to provide a full asset management view here. And as a result here, companies started to work harder to integrate those together, and Jan Erik was talking about that. So either to create point-to-point integration between these, to create complex architectures, and these systems, as a result, were susceptible to the incremental evolution to very complex infrastructure of interconnections between those applications. And those interconnections became by themselves barriers for rolling out any new business initiatives. And in many cases of these projects that we have seen by super majors and by national oil companies and others, in many cases, some of those dependencies that they created here were never documented in the first place or never understood. And as a result, those systems continue to do very well in isolation, but any change to any component in that whole network will have very unpredictable consequences on the whole process, and maybe, as I mentioned, a great hindrance to rolling out any integration or collaboration. But over the last 2 years, we saw real game changers here into this game. Effectively, in the period of about 8 months, we saw the oil sector moving from one of the best positions ever economically into one of the worst. And these movements came with a great impact, not only on the oil companies, but on projects like the digital oil field. So what we have seen first was the volatile demand and supply that existed today, which resulted in the pricing. What was the impact on the projects here as a game changer is that the fact that when the oil prices went to 147 and then dropped heavily into just above 40, there were many companies still operating on a cost base of about 110. And therefore, they couldn't move for about 6 to 8 months to a much smaller or much cost-effective process. And as a result, they shut down many of those projects, many of those initiatives. And we come back to the argument about whether actually the industry embraces the digitizing of those initiatives as part of the day-to-day business like many other industries or not, which Julian talked about. Then we saw almost a global economic meltdown, and by which many companies have taken great steps in cutting loads of projects, cutting down on those projects, trying to eliminate cost, and trying to look for new initiatives to make them more agile and more nimble to react to such factors that would come from outside. The high capital cost continued, the depleting asset base continued, but these companies needed to deliver, especially when they could see very quickly there is this surplus supply is going to come to an end at one point, and there is a huge potential would come here. Then came the Macondo Horizon disaster. And in that, according to the BP accident investigation report, which came out in September of 2010, the report said that there were indications of influx and increase in the pressure in the drill pipe almost 40 minutes before the rig crew took action to control the well. And they were obvious in the real-time data that was reported. Now, whether the crew did not manage to translate this data correctly or did something different, the jury is still out on this one. But definitely, there is a huge shift in the way we're going to manage the data, real-time data specifically. And then came finally the iPad. And the iPad is a very interesting concept. And you may be wondering how does that relate to the digital oil field or oil companies. The iPad came with two very important things, in fact. Number one, please raise your hand if you have a smartphone today. Almost everyone. Please raise your hand if you use your smartphone for more than just making a call or sending a text as well. So here is what the iPad came with. Number one, we're talking about standards and openness. Standards are no longer dictated by the IT companies who are developing these solutions. In fact, it is dictated by you. It's dictated by the market. Yes, maybe the IT companies are capable of creating the innovation and creating the shift and creating the wave, but what dictates that is you who are using those applications. And number two is the openness. In order to create those little applications that you enjoy today, you will need an infrastructure that is open enough to be able not only for the iPad, the iPhone, but for me as a user of BlackBerry as well, to communicate with similar applications or almost the same application, but from a different platform. And it created the last third thing, which is the collaboration. Today, one of my favorite application on my BlackBerry, which came from the iPhone, is a pub search. So I find a good pub, and I immediately put a comment on it. This comment is seen by anyone who has that program, if I wanted to. A form of collaboration. You may love that it's it's a very interesting application, but this is the future of applications, and the future of collaboration is definitely what the market dictates. And here is where we started in Oracle. We started to look into the initiatives related to the digital oil field from where it ended effectively. Many companies invested heavily in the bottom layer of this pyramid you see in front of you, in the automation, in the infrastructure, in the communications, and so on, fiber optics and the likes. And this is for the goal of using these tools to integrate systems together. But the integration here stopped at the point of creating those collaborative work environment and rooms and the likes, and maybe integrating some business processes. There were many questions, by the way, to the previous two speakers about the collaboration between the data, the collaboration between the processes, and the collaboration between people, and whether there is an impact on this or there is a relationship between those three. We do believe that that the integration or the digital oil field is a process of integrating people, processes, and technology or data. And for that reason, we started from the second layer of the pyramid, which is how do we create the collaborative environment that would allow, number one, for the short-term decision-making process here. So the very quick action that I need to take, whether it is requesting for an intervention, whether to take an action regarding a real-time data or the likes, but also to take that to the next level of the pyramid, which is the third level of the pyramid, to take it in a more strategic way. So what is the impact of a project like that in a portfolio of projects? What is the impact on the company? What is the impact of the oil prices today, which just passed the $90 2 days ago, on rolling out more projects here or extending the scope of the projects that I have? And this is where we started the process of creating a solution here, or a platform for the digital oil field. The solution consists of 4 fundamental pillars. Number one, the first pillar around the data management itself. So capturing of the data. As my previous presenters here, or speakers, spoke about, many of those systems that existed today and required collaboration were developed in proprietary tools or developed in-house. The first or the former, many of the solution and the software vendors are guilty of that. As a person comes from that space, they wanted very much to protect the competitive advantage of their solutions, so they kept it very close, they kept it proprietary in order to keep the customers captive to those technologies. We didn't want, or our objective is not to throw these away. There is huge investment that was put in every oil company around these solutions. So what can we do in order to integrate those solutions, to manage the data there in terms of what you see here, the data acquisition, the data filtration, and the likes, and to bring it to the next layer or the next pillar, which is the monitoring pillar. So understanding those data, trying to create an artificial intelligence within to understand the real-time data versus the non-real-time data, and to create the collaborative tools that would take advantage of those data or turn the data into information. And from that point, I want to take those collaboration tools and those data to influence the business process here, the processes. So what is the impact of what I did yesterday, and how can I change that business process, which by itself will feed into the knowledge management, will feed into the expert systems and so on, to continue optimizing that process. This is very much the concept of the upstream data management we created here. Let me expand a little bit on it in the next 2 minutes. So what we see here in that architecture is effectively we created that platform that is capable of collecting data from various data sources in an upstream company. Now, let me stop for a second and differentiate here, because when people talk about data integration, they talk about it as a generic term, and a generic term that we will create these point-to-point interfaces, or we create that integration platform that will integrate it together. We need to differentiate a little bit, because there is not one type of data here. In fact, there are 3 types of data that exist. There is the structured data inside the organization. So you have the data around your work orders, your costing, your organizations, the definition of your assets and the likes. Those are structured data in various systems, your ERP systems or other systems, production, drilling, and the likes. And those come, you could say, they are in a reasonable or moderate size of data, and the latency of this data could be hours, or could be minutes, or could be days even. This is as opposed to the real-time data. Terabytes of data coming on milliseconds basis and have completely different nature in terms of managing those data and taking advantage of those data. And then you have the third type of data, which is the unstructured data. You have your maps, you have your drawings, you have the likes. Now, the biggest challenge in an integration is to marry between those 3 different types of data and to create the collaborative environment that is capable of taking advantage of all those data. And that's what we tried to do over the years, at least the last 5 years, in building those platforms to take advantage of those data. So the first one was to create what is called the Master Data Hub. The Master Data Hub was not a large data warehouse that would copy the data somewhere and try to arrange it. It's actually a very nimble platform that is capable of taking a snapshot of the data at point in time from all the systems and rearranging those data as per a standard data model. The data model we adopted in Oracle, we looked at number of standards here, the standards like PPDM, like WITSML, like ProdML, and others. And we adopted these, we extended the data model that the hub is built in to accommodate the upstream data model like the PPDM data model here. For real-time data, we needed to look into the artificial intelligence as part of it. So we created the environment of what is called complex event processing. And this is a term that's been coined over the last 2 years, complex event processing. An environment that is capable of processing the data on the fly. So it's not taking only the data from the data historians and the data librarians, but even from the data acquisitions straight away, processing these in batches, looking at trends. So increasing the pressure, dropping in the temperature, change in the permeability of the soil, etc., that would be able to compare that not only to the history, but to a rules engine embedded within the artificial intelligence, and being able to translate this changes in the trend or the changes in the data into something meaningful for the crews to take action accordingly. And finally, we put here that extended with spatial technology to accommodate the maps, the graphs, the documents, and the likes. Now, that platform in the middle is now ready to hand over the data to the analytical tools, multidimensional analytical tools, to risk management simulation tools, or even to the business process. Now, what we did is we effectively separated the business process from the data sources that they come in. The business process, which normally would extend beyond just one applications, so it may cover more than one solution and more than one applications. And therefore, by separating that and treating it on a higher level, now I have not only visibility over those systems, but I'm giving the data to those who need it. The most common comment we get from oil companies or from users we talk to in terms of integration, they tell us 20% of the data that I need, I own. 80% of the data that I need for my day-to-day business, I don't. So by separating the business process from the applications they run on, I am giving the user this ability. Now, all of that can go up to the collaborative environment, whether this collaborative environment would be the collaboration room or could be the small application on your iPad. And this is how we see the next phase of the applications business, particularly, is the applications business will not be those mammoth application anymore. If you look at any application that your company has adopted, the users who have access to those applications will have access only to one form or one field or number of forms, not the entire applications, because the organizations don't think you need access to it. If you are a financial analyst, you have analysis on a specific part. If you are a buyer, that's what you do. If you are an intervention engineer, that's what you process is a work order, and so on, but you don't have access to the entire environment. And therefore, they start to put security measures for you not to access beyond that. Now, what the future of that is that little application that will be on the smart device that can only connect you to that function that you are responsible for. Still goes to the applications that you are familiar with, but you don't see it in that way. And that's what we mean by the market is going to dictate the standards, or actually it is dictating the standards that we're moving into. The result of this architecture that you see, we were able to create what is called an electronic well file. So one place where all the events, where all the announcement, where all the data, where all the details are in one place. Now, as they are in one place, I'm capable of illustrating that on a collaborative work environment, regardless of the discipline here. So I'm creating that for each discipline who are looking at the data. I'm capable of looking at real-time data separate from the near real-time data. I'm capable of looking into in-depth analysis and simulation and running simulation on the same set of data that is captured by those files, and capable of creating an enterprise-wide intelligence here. And to close that loop, there has to be an impact of those data on the business process itself. So the mapping of where the business process picks the data and how the user interacts with it and measuring those. This is an extremely important part that would lead us to the values and return on investment that every project is looking at. Over the last just 2.5 years, we've been working, as Oracle, we've been working with a number of independent vendors. Sarah was one of them, to evaluate the benefits that is obtained from projects that have been utilizing those approaches. And as much as we realize very much that those benefits are not solely related to the software platforms, because as we said, this is a whole process of integrating people, processes, and technology, we looked at the gains in those points. So in terms of operational efficiencies, in terms of cost reduction, in terms of reserve recovery, in terms of safety and operational integrity, and what is the impact of the collaboration in this field on those points. Any question?
Thank you very much indeed, Hossam. Questions? Yeah.
Yeah, morning, Hossam. Douwe Fransel's Independent Data Services. I like the whole premise of driving, people to call it a dashboard application, right? But you highlighted earlier in your presentation that, on the Macondo well, they saw influx 14 minutes before actually the blowout happened. One of the problems I see, and I call it the evil triangle, operator, rig company, and service companies, is that command and control is ill-defined, or the last decision always ends with the one guy on the rig being the drilling supervisor, right? We've seen it in a number of situations. How do you see these kind of collaborative technologies help the command and control structure being a lot more open? And therefore, if somebody sees in a collaborative center, he has the power to pick up the red phone the drilling supervisor and says, stop whatever you're doing, and we have a problem. Currently, that is, in a lot of cases, not the case. The end result is the DSV that decides stop or move ahead.
Oh, absolutely. I do agree with the approach. And by the way, this was not just the single incident. If we look 5 years back on the Texas City refinery, it is a repeat of that whole episode. And it is a series of things that would lead to it. Now, here is the role of artificial intelligence that many companies have been looking at. Because, number one, incidents or accidents don't just happen like that. There is at least series of indications that would precede that would lead to an incident or accident. Companies like to call it the near misses. Now, here is what we need to know is what is the near miss and how do we translate the near miss, and we create that kind of artificial intelligence to translate it. Now, the user, I do agree with this, and at one point in my professional career, I was one of those engineers on a rig, so I feel for these guys. There's a huge pressure. But the way we translate that information could be one translation different from the other, depending on the experience of the engineer who's there. And this is the role of technology in this case, because as much as we still heavily depend on the judgment of the crews and the engineers who are there, we still need to feed this whole notion of, we've been talking about sharing knowledge and so on for years. How can I bring that knowledge? Perhaps my example that I mentioned about the little program that searched for the best pubs is just a shot in the dark maybe, but it is the clue. It is how do I capture this information on the individual levels? And there was a question to Julian on this one, is how much do people want to collaborate? How much do they want to give away? Yes, it is a huge challenge because on the other hand, they are the same people who are hungry for the information coming from their counterpart on the other side. But the reality is, it is the platforms, the collaboration platforms that are the hindrance of those collaboration in the first place. It is not the people. Maybe the people want to retain some knowledge to retain some competitive advantage. But as we could see, is that when the collaboration platform is there, I just put that note. It's a great pub. That's it. And that note is enough for more people to go and analyze and look and take advantage of it. And that's what we believe is really, it is the responsibility of IT companies and technology companies who are developing these technologies to make it more open, to make it more accessible and more easy to use.
Can I just ask one question? Help me out, Hossam, on the role on Oracle. I've seen those presentations on the architecture from companies like Schlumberger and Landmark and others. Oracle is a leading database vendor, and companies like Schlumberger and Halliburton configure those into their master data hub technologies. What are you selling here against what, say, the other companies are doing?
Yeah, what differentiates you, coming back to the marketing message that Julian was talking about, what differentiates you? What differentiates us is the openness of it. I mean, many companies, by the way, I'm an ex-Schlumberger, so if we're talking about Schlumberger, many of those technology companies who existed today really to a great extent created that in a proprietary approach to protect their competitive advantage. And we are trying to get away from that, is to create the open approach to the next generation approach to platforms. So really to a great extent, how can I enable that collaboration today of systems like, you know, the finders of the world and the seabeds of the world and the others, despite the fact that they are closed today, how can I bring it to the next step to be more open until they realize it, that the standards dictated by the market has to push them into that openness.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we've got to move on before break. Oh, hang on,
there was a question in the back.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to pick on your point on openness. So, based on what you said around your desire to have an open approach compared with traditional vendors, kind of more proprietary approaches, will you then be making your data hub technology available on other vendors' database platforms, maybe Microsoft SQL Server and things like that?
Definitely, our middleware platform is open for others as well today. However, we continue to increase that as per whatever is available. What is more important is the database, again, separating the database from the integration platform is a very important part of our architecture to separate it from whether it's an Oracle database or a SQL Server or DB2 or others. We realize that oil companies and many companies today have different way of handling or managing their data. At the end of the day, the architectures designed by them, we need to take advantage of it and leverage the investment that they have put. This is definitely our plan. We started it, we offer it today, and we continue to do.
Just one more. I'm not sure if this is on. I'm Richard King from Centric Energy Upstream in Aberdeen. Your slide showing your data model along the middle had a whole range of different application technologies at the bottom. I guess my question is this real? Do those applications plug into your data model? And if they do, what mechanism do they use?
Okay. It is real. We tested it. It's not a walk in the park. Number one, exercise. Everybody knows that. And system integrators have made tons of money on those exercises. They still do. But here is what we do. Is as part of, I started by describing that we definitely needed to differentiate between the structured data, the unstructured data, and the real-time data. This is the first step in realizing how difficult the task is or how easy the task could be. The second one, based on each of them, when we created those platforms, we created the connection layer with these systems. We have partnered with a number of those vendors today, and some we haven't partnered with. So those we partnered with, we created that connecting layer between us that would be able to take the data from their systems or applications into the integration platform. But there is one important element in this whole thing, is that really what we are trying to target here is data stored in a database. The real-time data will be stored in a data librarian or a data historian, the OSIPI and the likes of the world, or the Aspen Tech and so on. The drilling data will be maintained in a database. What we are targeting is a data in the database, is a raw data effectively. That takes us from this whole notion of looking at the integration of the applications itself. The applications will continue to handle the same data, but what we are trying to do with the integration platform is to cleanse that data. So the definition of this data from one system may be different from the other. And on that integration platform, the cleansing process takes place. This spare part is defined as 1, 2, 3 in one system, as A, B, C in another. But it is exactly the same spare part. When I need it for an intervention, I know it exists in that warehouse. instead of just looking for it and I'm not quite sure what it is. It's effectively creating the mapping between the data, and that's what we are after. So that by itself is making the task easier for us to create those integration layers in between. We also work very hard with our system integrator partners in this case, and we keep the door open for more because these are the guys who know how to effectively do this job better than us. We work with them to create those layers and to maintain the IP for these guys as well.
Okay. I'm sure there's many more there. I'm afraid we've got to move on then.
Yeah, the panel is coming, and I'm sure many of those questions will come. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Our final talk.
I hope you have a good day.
And can we reconvene at just after 2:45, between 2:45 and 2:10? I'd like to start at 2:10.